Rain had been falling for 3 days straight, not the kind that sang gently on rooftops, but the cold, punishing kind that turned the city into a blur of gray. On the corner of 7th and Maple, beside a flickering streetlight, sat a man wrapped in a tattered brown blanket. His shoes were soaked through, his fingers purple from the chill, but his posture remained calm, almost dignified, as if he refused to let the storm see him defeated. His name was Malcolm, though few people ever asked. He was in his 40s, skin the color of warm coffee, with eyes that carried both sadness and kindness, a quiet contradiction that made him stand out among the faceless crowd. Each morning, he folded the cardboard he slept on, tucked away his belongings in a torn duffel bag, and sat under a bus shelter, greeting strangers who rarely answered back. That afternoon, as thunder rolled across the city, a sleek black car stopped at the light nearby. Inside, Clara Bennett was gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her navy business suit was spotless, her diamond earrings caught the brief flashes of lightning. She was on her way home from yet another long meeting, her mind consumed by deadlines and numbers. She didn't notice the man sitting just a few feet away. Not until the crosswalk light turned red and he stood up. Clara saw him reach into his bag and pull out something unexpected, an old, weather-beaten umbrella, its handle cracked, its fabric patched in places. He looked toward the sidewalk where a young mother and her child were struggling to stay dry. Without hesitation, he walked over, smiled faintly, and handed her the umbrella. The mother protested, but he just shook his head. "You keep it. The little one shouldn't get sick." The light turned green. Clara's car rolled forward, but her eyes stayed locked on the man standing in the downpour, his shoulders already soaked. Something about that small act, so pure, so undeservedly kind, pierced through the armor she'd built around herself. That night, long after she'd parked in her heated garage and changed into silk pajamas, she couldn't stop thinking about him. The city outside roared with rain, but in her mind it was only that man's quiet, selfless gesture that echoed. Clara sat in her car for a long while after leaving the cafe. The engine was running, but she didn't move. Malcolm's words played in her mind like a melody that refused to fade. "People see a homeless man, but not the man I used to be." She felt the weight of those words pressing on her chest. She had seen him before, dozens of times, maybe, sitting near the subway entrance, wrapped in an old military coat. But until that morning, she had never looked. Her life, in contrast, was made of glass and marble. The quiet hum of her penthouse, the soft light of chandeliers, the sound of her heels clicking on polished floors, it was all beautiful, but hollow. There were no footprints in the corridors, no laughter echoing off the walls, just silence, heavy and perfect. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She wandered through her apartment, the city lights painting her walls in restless gold. She stopped by the window, looking down at the street. Somewhere below, Malcolm might still be awake, perhaps sitting by the same coffee shop or finding shelter beneath a bridge. She wondered how someone could fall so far and still carry so much dignity in his eyes. The next day, Clara returned to the cafe. It was drizzling, and the gray morning smelled of rain and asphalt. Malcolm was there, as if he had been waiting. He lifted his gaze when she approached, surprise flickering across his tired face. "You came back," he said softly. "I did. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said yesterday." He smiled faintly, a smile that belonged to someone who had once had everything. "People usually don't come back." "I'm not most people," Clara said, sitting down. There was silence between them, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was the silence of two souls who had already said too much with their eyes. She asked him about his life, not out of pity, but curiosity. Malcolm told her about his years as a carpenter, how he had built houses that now stood taller than his own chances in life. He spoke about his wife, about losing her to illness, and how everything after that became a blur of unpaid bills, bad choices, and forgotten phone numbers. "I guess I stopped fighting," he said finally. "Sometimes the world takes more than you can give." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "Maybe," she whispered, "but sometimes the world gives back when you least expect it." When she left, she slipped a small envelope onto the table. Inside was a note with her phone number and a single line: "I'd like to help." Malcolm didn't open it right away. He just stared at the folded paper, unsure whether it was a key to something better or just another reminder of how far he had fallen. That night, as the rain turned into snow, he finally unfolded it. The paper was slightly smudged from her perfume in his damp hands. He traced her handwriting with his thumb, and for the first time in years, felt a flicker of warmth that wasn't from a cup of cheap coffee. He looked up at the stars hidden behind the city lights and murmured, "Maybe this time I'll try again." The following morning, Clara awoke earlier than usual. The sun was just rising, spilling soft light across her bedroom floor like a whisper of hope. She poured herself a cup of coffee, but it didn't taste the same. Her thoughts were elsewhere, lingering on the old carpenter who'd once built homes and now slept beneath them. She picked up her phone and dialed the number she had written on the note. For a moment, there was no answer. Then a deep, cautious voice came through. "Hello? It's Clara." There was a pause, then the faint sound of relief. "I wasn't sure you really meant it." "I did," she said. "Meet me at the cafe again. I want to talk." When she arrived, Malcolm was already there, wearing the same faded coat but a cleaner shirt underneath. He had clearly tried. He'd even combed his hair back. That quiet effort touched her more deeply than she expected. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said as she sat down. "Not at all. I have a proposal." She explained that she owned several properties across the city, apartments, offices, and an old warehouse she had recently bought with the intention of turning it into a small workshop for community projects. She was looking for someone to help renovate it, she said carefully. Someone who knows how to build, who understands wood, someone with heart. He blinked, clearly unsure how to respond. "You're offering me a job?" She replied, "I'm offering you a chance. The rest is up to you." Malcolm stared at her for a long moment, his throat tightening. "You don't even know me." Clara smiled gently. "I know enough." That afternoon, she drove him to the warehouse. The place smelled of dust and forgotten dreams. But beneath the decay lay something solid, potential. Malcolm walked through the empty space, running his fingers along the rough beams, inspecting the floors, the light, the air. His eyes softened. "It's good wood," he said quietly. "Strong bones. Just needs someone to care for it again." She handed him the keys. "Then start with that." From that day on, Malcolm showed up early every morning. He scrubbed floors, sanded old panels, fixed window frames, and repaired doors that hadn't opened in years. Clara stopped by every few days, bringing lunch or coffee, asking questions, watching him work with a concentration that felt sacred. In those hours together, their words came easier. He began to tell her more about his life, about his daughter who had drifted away after his wife died, about the nights he spent under bridges, thinking he'd never be seen again. Clara listened without judgment, her eyes soft, her hands often folded in quiet empathy. Sometimes she shared too,
about her late husband, about the loneliness that wealth couldn't touch. She said once, "People think having money means having everything, but it can build walls taller than any poverty." Malcolm nodded. "Maybe that's why you saw me," he said. "You were looking through your own." Days turned into weeks, and the workshop slowly came alive again. Wooden tables, polished floors, and new light fixtures filled the space with purpose. One afternoon, when Clara walked in, she found Malcolm sanding a table he'd built from discarded planks. "For you," he said, smiling. "It's not much, but it's made from second chances." She ran her hand across the smooth surface, tears glimmering in her eyes. "It's beautiful, Malcolm." He looked down, his voice low. "So is what you've done for me." Outside, the winter wind was sharp, but inside that dusty old building, something warm was growing. A quiet friendship, built from kindness, loss, and the slow rediscovery of hope. The weeks flowed gently into months. Winter loosened its grip on the city, and the warehouse, once a cold skeleton of dust and echoes, began to breathe again. Sunlight now filtered through the clean windows, glinting off smooth oak tables, and the smell of varnish mixed with coffee in the air. What had once been a forgotten ruin was slowly becoming a sanctuary. Clara visited often, though sometimes she didn't know why she came. She would bring fresh pastries and coffee, pretending it was to check on progress, but in truth she came to see Malcolm. There was something grounding in his quiet persistence, in the way he approached every broken beam or cracked wall, not with frustration, but with care. One morning, she arrived earlier than usual. The sound of a radio filled the space softly. Malcolm was singing under his breath, his deep, gravelly voice weaving through a song from decades past. He didn't notice her standing there for a moment, and Clara found herself smiling, something she hadn't done without effort in years. When he finally saw her, he chuckled. "Caught me off guard again." "I like seeing you like this," she said. "Happy." He shrugged, but the corners of his mouth lifted. "Guess I forgot what that feels like." They sat together, sharing breakfast at one of the tables he'd built. The morning light touched his face, and she could see the lines of hardship etched into his skin, not as scars, but as stories. "Malcolm," she began gently, "what would you do if you could start again? If you didn't have to worry about where you'd sleep or what tomorrow would bring?" He thought for a long moment, eyes distant. "I'd teach," he said finally. "Carpentry, woodworking, not just the craft, but the patience behind it. Kids today don't build much with their hands anymore. Maybe they'd find peace in shaping something real." Her gaze softened. "Then maybe that's what this place can be." He looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "I bought this warehouse because I wanted to do something meaningful with it. I was thinking of leasing it out, but what if we turned it into a community workshop? You could teach, help others rebuild their lives the way you rebuilt yours." Malcolm's eyes glistened, though he tried to hide it. "You'd really do that?" "I would," she said simply, "but only if you'll run it." He laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that trembles between disbelief and gratitude. "I don't have much, Clara. No degree, no address, just these hands." "Then that's enough," she replied. "They've built more than most people ever will." For the first time in years, Malcolm felt something steady inside him, a quiet certainty that he still had purpose. That evening, after Clara left, he stayed behind, looking around the space that had once been nothing but cold brick and dust. Now it felt alive. He whispered into the silence, "Thank you," though she wasn't there to hear it. But fate, it seemed, wasn't finished weaving their stories together. A few days later, while installing a heavy shelf, Malcolm lost his footing. The plank slipped, striking his shoulder, and the world tilted. He fell hard, the sharp crack of wood echoing through the workshop. When Clara arrived hours later with fresh paint samples, she found him sitting on the floor, pale and clutching his arm. "Malcolm," she gasped, rushing to him. "You're fine," he muttered, though pain twisted his features. "You're not fine. You need a doctor." He tried to protest, but the firmness in her voice left no room for argument. She drove him to the hospital herself, gripping the steering wheel tightly, terrified of what might happen if she lost him, this man who had somehow become the heart of her days. In the sterile brightness of the emergency room, as doctors examined him, Clara sat waiting, her mind spinning. She realized how deeply she cared, how the lines between charity and affection had long since blurred. When Malcolm returned with his arm in a sling, he gave her a tired but grateful smile. "Guess I'll have to slow down for a bit." She exhaled, her voice trembling with relief. "You scared me." "Didn't mean to," he said softly. Then, after a pause, he added, "I didn't think anyone would ever worry about me again." Clara reached out and took his uninjured hand. "Then let that be the last time you think that." Outside, the city moved as it always did. Fast, cold, indifferent. But in that small hospital room, two people who had once been strangers found something rare. The fragile, unspoken bond of souls who had rescued each other without realizing it.
Spring announced itself in the city with soft rains and the scent of new beginnings. The warehouse that had once been a ghost of a dream now thrummed with life. Laughter spilled from its doors, the rhythmic hum of saws and the chatter of hands learning to shape wood, blending into a kind of music. The community workshop, Second Chances, they'd named it, had become more than a project. It was a heartbeat. Malcolm stood near the front entrance one afternoon, watching two young men argue over how to sand a tabletop. Their energy made him smile. He had learned to guide without commanding, to teach without preaching. His shoulder had healed well enough for him to work again, though Clara still scolded him for lifting more than he should. Clara, meanwhile, had become a familiar presence there, not as a sponsor but as a friend. She'd trade her high heels for sneakers and help sweep up sawdust, laughing when her once perfect manicure vanished under the fine powder of wood. Whispers that she'd changed. She no longer arrived at charity galas draped in diamonds, but she did show up at city council meetings, speaking passionately about community programs and forgotten people. One evening, as the last of the students left, Malcolm stayed behind, wiping down the workbench. The soft glow of a single hanging light bathed the room in gold. Clara watched him from the doorway. "You've built something beautiful," she said quietly. He looked up, that gentle half-smile she had come to know so well forming on his lips. "We did." She stepped closer. "No, Malcolm, you did this. You gave them hope." He shook his head. "Hope's a funny thing, Clara. You can't give it away if you don't have any left yourself. You reminded me how to find it again." Their silence stretched comfortably, full of everything neither needed to say. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly, a storm rolling in from the coast. A few days later, the storm hit hard. Rain poured over the city, turning streets into rivers. The warehouse's roof leaked in places they hadn't yet fixed, but Malcolm stayed to cover the tools, humming softly as he worked. Just as he was about to leave, he saw a small figure huddled under the awning,
a teenage girl, soaked through, clutching a worn backpack to her chest. "You can't stay out here," he called out. "Come inside before you catch your death." The girl hesitated, her face pale in the streetlight. "I just need somewhere dry. I'll leave after." "Don't worry," he said, opening the door wider. "You're safe here." She stepped in, dripping water onto the concrete floor. Her clothes were torn, her eyes dark with exhaustion. Something about her, the tilt of her head, the wary strength in her stare, tugged at something deep inside Malcolm. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Naomi," she whispered. He froze. That name. His daughter's name. "Naomi what?" he managed, voice barely steady. She hesitated, then said softly, "Naomi Bennett." Malcolm's heart clenched. The name hit him like lightning. His last name, one he hadn't heard from another soul in years. His mind spun back to a photograph, long faded, of a little girl with braids and a gap-toothed smile. He stared at her now, grown and weary. "Naomi?" She frowned, stepping back. "How do you know my name?" He couldn't finish. His throat felt tight, the years of guilt and distance pressing down like stone. "Naomi, it's me. It's your father." The girl froze, confusion and disbelief warring in her face. "No, my father's dead." He swallowed hard. "I should have been. For a long time I might as well have been. But I'm here now." Her eyes filled with tears. She dropped the backpack, trembling. "You left us. Mom said you disappeared, that you chose the streets over us." His voice cracked. She was right to be angry. "I lost my job, the house, everything. I couldn't face you knowing I couldn't feed you. I thought staying away would hurt less than watching you starve with me." For a long, terrible moment, she said nothing. The rain hammered on the roof, the storm outside echoing the one between them. Then she whispered, "I waited, you know. Every birthday, I waited." Malcolm stepped forward, tears mixing with the rain still clinging to his face. "And I've spent every night since wishing I could take it back. But maybe I can make it right now." Naomi stared at him, her face trembling with anger and longing. She wanted to run, yet couldn't move. At last she whispered, "You really built this place?" He nodded. "With help, to give others what I couldn't give you. Safety. A place to start over." Something softened in her expression. "Then maybe that's where we start too." Malcolm's breath caught. When she stepped into his arms, he felt years of regret melt away into something warm, fragile, and whole. From the doorway, Clara stood quietly, having arrived unnoticed in the storm. She watched as the two figures clung to each other, the broken father, the wounded daughter, and she smiled through her tears. It wasn't just rain outside anymore. It was renewal.
The storm passed overnight, leaving the city washed clean, streets glistening like mirrors under the pale morning sun. Inside the warehouse, everything smelled of damp wood and fresh beginnings. Malcolm barely slept. He'd stayed awake watching Naomi curled up on the couch in the office, her wet clothes replaced by an old workshop hoodie. Every time he looked at her, it felt unreal, as if the years between them were a dream he hadn't quite woken from. When she finally stirred, blinking against the sunlight, he handed her a mug of coffee. "It's not great," he said quietly, "but it's warm." Naomi accepted it with a faint, tired smile. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." "I didn't think I'd earn that right," he admitted. She looked at him, really looked, and he could see the storm still flickering behind their eyes. But beneath it, there was something else, a small, stubborn ember of hope. Clara arrived soon after, carrying a bag of breakfast sandwiches, and that calm, steady presence that always seemed to anchor the room. She froze when she saw Naomi sitting there, and then glanced at Malcolm, who nodded faintly.
"She's my daughter," he said softly. Clara's eyes widened and then softened. "You found her." Naomi gave a small, wary laugh. "I think I found him, actually." Clara smiled gently. "Then maybe that's how it was meant to happen." She set the food down and added, "You both need to eat. Heavy conversations go better on a full stomach." Over breakfast, the three of them talked in hesitant fragments, about the workshop, about the city, about the little things that didn't hurt to remember. Naomi didn't share where she'd been staying or how she'd ended up on the streets. She wasn't ready. Malcolm didn't push. He knew that some stories had to unfold at their own pace. Days passed. Naomi stayed on, helping with odd tasks around second chances. She had a sharp mind and quick hands, and though she said she knew nothing about woodworking, she learned fast. Sometimes Malcolm would glance over and catch her watching him, not with resentment, but with the quiet curiosity of someone trying to reconcile memory with reality. Clara, meanwhile, became the quiet thread stitching their fragile new life together. She encouraged Naomi to design a logo for the workshop, taught her how to manage inventory, and brought in more volunteers. With every day, the place grew busier, laughter echoing where once there had only been silence.
Summer crept into the city quietly that year, as if afraid to disturb what had finally begun to heal. Second Chances was thriving, a rare bloom of kindness in a place that often forgot such things existed. Every day, new faces came through the door, men fresh out of halfway houses, single mothers learning a trade, teenagers avoiding the streets. The scent of sawdust and coffee had become the air of hope itself. But good things have gravity, and gravity always attracts challenge. One humid afternoon, Clara burst into the workshop holding a thick envelope. Her face was pale. "Malcolm," she said, "we've got a problem." He looked up from the bench where he'd been showing Naomi how to plane a board. "What kind of problem?" She handed him the papers. "The property owner's selling the building. The new buyer wants to tear it down for luxury apartments." The words landed like a hammer. Malcolm stared at the lease agreement, the fine print blurring. "We still have 6 months left on our contract. They're claiming the sale voids it. We could fight it in court, but—" She hesitated. "I don't have the money to go against a developer this big." Naomi stepped closer, voice trembling with disbelief. "They can't just take it. This place saved people." Clara's eyes softened, but her expression was grim. "They can, unless we find a way to buy it ourselves." For a long time, no one spoke. The sounds of the workshop, laughter, sanding, quiet chatter, went on around them, blissfully unaware. Malcolm finally said, "How much?" She gave a number. It was enough to make him laugh, a dry, weary sound. "I couldn't even afford a fraction of that when I had a steady job." Clara touched his arm. "Don't give up yet. Maybe there's another way." Over the next few weeks, they tried everything. Clara reached out to investors. Malcolm organized community fundraisers. Naomi made flyers and launched an online campaign. The story of Second Chances began to spread. Local news covered it. Social media picked it up. Donations trickled in, but it wasn't enough. Then came the day the developer's crew arrived. Men in suits and hard hats, measuring the walls as if the place were already dead. Malcolm confronted them at the door, his calm breaking for the first time. "This isn't just a building," he said, voice shaking. "It's a home. You don't bulldoze a home." The foreman just shrugged. Orders are orders. When they left, Malcolm sat on the steps, staring at his hands, the same hands that had built tables, chairs, a future. Naomi sat beside him, silent. "I spent years destroying everything I touched. Now it feels like, even when I build something right, the world finds a way to take it." Naomi's voice was quiet but steady. "Then maybe we fight harder this time." That night, she stayed up editing a video, footage of the workshop, of the people it had helped,
of her father teaching kids how to build something from nothing. She ended it with her own voice, trembling but fierce. He taught me that broken things can be fixed, even people. Help us save the place that saved us. The video went viral. Within days, donations poured in. Journalists called, influencers shared their story. And one morning, Claire walked into the workshop, holding her phone, tears shining in her eyes. "Malcolm," she whispered, "you need to see this." The mayor had just announced a grant for community programs, and Second Chances was at the top of the list. The city would cover half the purchase price if they could raise the rest. They did it in less than a week. When the papers were signed, Malcolm stood in the middle of the workshop, staring at the walls as if seeing them for the first time. Clara was beside him, her hand slipping into his. "You did it," she said softly. He turned to her, smiling. "We did." Naomi ran up, waving the keys. "Dad, it's official! We own it!" He pulled her into his arms, laughter breaking through tears. "Guess we finally built something that can't be taken away." Clara looked at them, this man who'd once been a stranger in rags, now standing tall beside his daughter, surrounded by people who believed in him. Something inside her settled. For the first time in years, she felt complete. As evening fell, they gathered everyone, volunteers, students, neighbors, and strung lights across the rafters. Music played, laughter filled the air. Malcolm made a small speech, but it wasn't about victory. It's not about wood or nails. It's about what you make with what's left when life takes everything. And if you build it with love, it'll stand. Applause filled the room, echoing off the high walls like a heartbeat. Later, as the lights dimmed and the crowd thinned, Clara and Malcolm stood outside watching the city glitter in the distance. The night breeze carried the faint scent of sawdust and summer rain. Clara looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens now?" Malcolm smiled, eyes soft and certain. "Now we keep building." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and together they watched the workshop glow from within, a beacon of everything that had been lost, found, and rebuilt.
Winter came again, soft and silent over the city. Snow dusted the streets like powdered sugar, and the world seemed calmer somehow, slower. Claire walked through the park one morning, bundled in her warm coat, her breath forming little clouds in the crisp air. She carried a small thermos of coffee and a paper bag of fresh pastries. Her steps took her, almost unconsciously, toward the spot under the old oak tree. There, sitting on the same worn bench where everything had begun, was Samuel. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him sat two other men, both bundled in clean coats, holding hot drinks. They were laughing at something Samuel said. When he saw Claire, he stood up, his face lighting up with that same warm, honest smile that had once cut through her loneliness. "Claire," he said softly, "I was wondering if you'd come by today." She handed him the bag. "I figured you'd be out here feeding half the park again." He chuckled, the sound deep and full of life. "They're my friends. We help each other now. A little warmth goes a long way, you know." Claire nodded, her eyes glistening. "You were right all along. It's not about what we have, it's about what we give." Samuel smiled, then looked up at the sky where faint sunlight broke through the gray clouds. "You gave me a chance when I had nothing, and now I just want to do the same for others." He gestured toward the men beside him. "We started something, Claire. A small program downtown, meals, shelter, a place to start over. I told them it's because of someone who believed a broken man could still do good." Claire felt her heart swell. "Samuel, that's incredible." He shrugged humbly. "It's not much yet, but it's hope, and sometimes that's enough." She reached out and took his hand, rough, warm, real. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of things unspoken. Gratitude, forgiveness, the quiet, miraculous tenderness of two souls who had saved each other without ever meaning to. As the sun rose higher, children began to play nearby, their laughter echoing like music across the frosted grass. Claire turned to Samuel and said, "Would you join me for Christmas dinner this year? No soup kitchen tables, no fancy estates, just people who care." Samuel's smile grew wider, his eyes soft. "I'd like that very much." They walked away together, side by side, leaving 2 sets of footprints in the snow, proof that even the coldest season could bloom with warmth when hearts chose kindness. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew. Sometimes the greatest fortune in life isn't found in wealth or comfort, but in a single act of compassion that changes everything.